In recent times, Ghanaian Christianity has seen a huge rise in the numbers of people claiming to be prophets and giving prophecies to Christians. But what are we to make of this trend? Prophecy may mean many things to many people, but to us Christians, our basis of understanding the practice of prophecy must only be derived from a deeper study of men and women, whom the Bible explicitly called true prophets. And when we do that well, we will find one interesting thread that runs through all biblical prophecy. Prophecy in the Bible was centered on preserving Yahweh's covenant relationship with his chosen people. A covenant was basically a legal contract which required ancient Israel to be faithful to Yahweh only. In return, Yahweh was to be with them and meet their needs. Now, just like a marriage, unfaithfulness by following other gods meant a divorce, a loss of protection leading to defeat in war, and disinheritance, that is, exile from the promised land. A prophet's primary job, therefore, was to remind the nation of their covenant with Yahweh and warn them to stay faithful to it or face the consequences of their unfaithfulness. When they prophesied about blessings, for example, it was the blessings that Yahweh had promised them as a people if they were faithful to the covenant. Because of this national covenantal focus, they hardly ever prophesied about individuals or personal lives unless those people affected the entire nation. This is why the Bible documents many uncomfortable interactions between prophets like Nathan and King David, Elijah and King Ahab, and Jeremiah and the kings who ruled Judah during his days. Now, these were the leaders of the nation Israel, and their choices greatly determined the faithfulness of the rest of the nation to Yahweh's covenant. It is interesting to note that in the few instances where some of the prophets prophesied to individuals who weren't leaders of Israel, these individuals were actually non-Hebrew people who trusted Yahweh, whilst his own covenant people had abandoned him. Naaman, a commander of an enemy army, received healing instructions from despised prophet Elisha. Zarephath, a non-Hebrew, was blessed by the persecuted prophet Elijah. These were meant to show what Yahweh could do for Israel if only they remained faithful to him. In addition, examples we do have in the Bible of prophets who prophesied about personal prosperity and catered for private interests were the false prophets, chief amongst them being the infamous diviner Balaam in Numbers 22 to 24. Once you paid him the diviner's fee, Balaam would prophesy in your favor. We see a similar thing in the New Testament in Acts 16 to 21, where Paul and Silas encounter a slave girl who made money for her owners from divination. Not surprisingly, this is also the mode of operation of fetish priests in traditional Ghanaian religions, which has deceptively crept into Christian circles under the label of prophecy. The gift of prophecy works the same way in the New Testament. The church is God's nation, and as Paul the Apostle explained in 1 Corinthians 14, prophecy is for building and benefiting the church as a community. New Testament prophecy encourages those in the Lord to be united, holy, and remain faithful, especially in the midst of the harassment and persecution the New Testament church sometimes faced, and which many of our brothers and sisters throughout the world continue to face to this day. Thus, when Prophet Agabus prophesied to Paul that he would face persecution in Acts 21, 10 to 11, it wasn't because Paul was on a personal business journey. No. Rather, his prophecy was because Paul's important work for God of preaching the gospel and founding and sustaining churches was under threat. All of this is to say the following. 1. It doesn't matter if a so-called prophet correctly prophesies when a plane crash will happen. It has nothing to do with the mission of the church. 2. It doesn't matter if a so-called prophet correctly predicts who is going to be the next president of Ghana. That is not the task God has called the church to. It doesn't matter if a so-called prophet tells a young woman in the church which man she must marry. God gives us the freedom to choose so we can mature in our decisions and be responsible for our own actions and choices. Otherwise, He would have made us into robots. Instead, God wants us to take good decisions and trust that He will be with us through whatever difficulties come as a result. The church is called to be faithful to its God precisely because it will face pressures to be unfaithful to His appointed one, Jesus the King. Christians must therefore seek out prophets who call us to such faithfulness, even if their message is unpalatable to us. Thanks for joining. Goodbye.